3D film cameras have been around since the late 80s, but because of social media, they've been able to make a comeback. This is the Nishika N8000. It is a 3D camera with 4 lenses on it, and because of that, you are able to capture motion in your images.
We see the world around us in 3 dimensions, but ordinary photography shows us only 2. Now you don't have to settle for 2-dimensional pictures of a 3-dimensional world. Introducing a new dimension in photography, the Nishika N8000 3D camera, because the world isn't flat.
This works just like any 35mm point-and-shoot camera. The 4 lenses are fixed at 30mm, and then the shutter speed is also fixed at 1/60th of a second, but you do get 3 aperture settings. You have the sun, which is f/19, sun with clouds, which is f/11, and indoor or clouds, which is f/8. Now, portraits probably work best for this camera, but I do not shoot portraits, and when you get any new camera, you want to shoot with it like you normally do. So with film, I usually shoot in a street photography style, and that's exactly what I did with this camera. Because of the 4 lenses, you are getting 4 half negatives of the same image, just at a slightly different angle, which take up the size of 2 normal shots. Loading film is like any other 35mm camera, but where your film goes, there is a sticker that tells you how many shots you get per roll. So a roll of 36, you get 18, 24 is 12, and a roll of 12, which I've never even seen before, you get 6 shots. It also recommends 100 ISO film, but because you can't really change that many settings, I just used 400, which was fine. On the top, there is a guide for your ideal distance of your background, middle ground, and foreground. The camera takes 2 AA batteries, and all the batteries really do is show a red dot in the viewfinder that tells you if your image is too dark when you press the shutter halfway down. But because I also have a flash for the camera, I didn't really have to worry about that too much. But, because it was a bright and sunny day and I was outside, I really only used the flash when I was in a shadow area. But, if you use this camera for anything that's not outside, you should definitely think about getting a flash to go along with it. Typically, when shooting with this camera, you just hold it up horizontally and get vertical images out of it. But for a couple of shots, I held it vertical to try and get some horizontal shots, which I did. But then instead of the image moving side to side like it usually does, it moves up and down, which, when done right, can look cool, but, it didn't really work for the things that I was shooting. Now, if you do get a 3D camera, you can still send your film to a lab to get developed and scanned, but to make the images move, you're going to have to do that yourself. It's actually pretty easy to put them together, and will only take a couple of minutes, and there are a whole bunch of videos on YouTube just explaining how to do it, but I'm going to quickly go over it. Once you have your file loaded into Photoshop, you're going to go in with the marquee tool, M for shortcut, and go in and select each frame of the image one by one, and then you're going to do that on your background layer, and press Command J, which will duplicate the layer. So you're just going to do that for every single one going down the line. And just make sure that you're on your background layer when you are copying your frames, because if you're on one of the duplicated layers and you try copying from there, it's not going to work because you're not copying any selected pixels, so you just want to make sure that bottom background layer is selected. So now that we have all 4 frames duplicated, you can go ahead and turn off that background layer, and we're going to start moving the images over to combine them into one. So with the first image, which is on your far left, which is that top layer, you're going to go ahead and lower the opacity to 50%. And then from there, you're just going to start moving the images over and line them up to your center subject. And for this image, it is the kind of tower part of the bridge. So I'm just going to line them up together. Just want to make sure they're as close as possible to make sure that, they're perfectly aligned. And then, once you have that second layer perfectly aligned with the first one, you're just going to go ahead and turn off the second layer. And then you're just going to repeat that for the third and fourth image. So the third one, we're just going to move over again and line it up with that bridge. And then once we have it all lined up, going to turn off the third layer and then move on to the fourth one and line that up as well. So now that all our frames are lined up, I'm just going to go in and crop the image so we get rid of all of that negative space. And then I'm also going to go and bring the opacity back on that first layer back up to 100. And then as you can see, all my other layers are deselected. So the only one visible right now is that first top layer. And then from there, we're going to create a timeline effect. So we're going to go into window and timeline, and that brings up this little box here at the bottom. And then we're going to go ahead and click create frame animation. And if it doesn't show up for you, you want to click the little arrow to the side and just click the bottom one to make sure it is selected. And then from there, you're just going to click that create frame animation button, and it's going to bring up this little window right here. And that's basically your frames. And then at the bottom, you see a little timer. So if there, it just says 0 seconds, which is the default. So you're going to go ahead and right click that and then go change it from other. And then the time that I just put in is 0.13, and that's just the time that I found out works best for me. Obviously, you don't have to do this, so whatever time you think looks best, just use that, but this is kind of just a nice start out for you if you're not sure what to put. So now that our time is set, we're going to go in and add more frames. So you're just going to press the little plus button at the side, and you're going to press that 5 times. So you have 6 different frames, and those 6 different frames are going to be our images, so they're moving. So the first frame right here is just going to be that first top layer, so you want to make sure just that layer is visible. And the second frame, we're just going to go in and turn on the second layer and then turn off the first one so that just that second one is created. So when it moves from the first frame to the second one, you only see the second layer. And then we're going to do basically the same with the third. Turn the third one on, turn the first one off, and then fourth one, because I do have 4 images, I'm going to turn, the fourth one on and the first one off. And then since this is going to be looping, I'm just going to go back. The fifth one is now, since the last one was the fourth layer, the fifth one is now going to be the third layer for that loop effect. And then with the sixth one, since we are looping back up, since the previous one was third, this one is going to be now the second layer. So then we now created that looping effect. So now when we press play, as you can see, it's just looping back and forth from 1 to 6 and then replaying, and you get that moving effect. But now we also still have some negative space from the image, so we're just going to go ahead and go in and crop that on each frame. So the first one, I just brought in a little bit, and then since they are different frames, they're not all going to be the same crop, so you're going to have to go in for each one. See this third one here, it's a little bit not aligned at the bottom, so I just go in and crop that up. And then the fourth one, again, just bring it in a little bit on that right side so it is all fit there. And then again, we can press play, and now we have it looping perfectly with no kind of negative space either. Now the last thing we just have to do is save this into a GIF. So to do that, you're just going to go into File and then Export, and then you're just going to go over and click Save for Web. And then it's going to bring up this dialog box here. And then at the top here, you want to make sure that it is GIF is selected, because that is how your video is going to play back and how you can also share it to social media and stuff like that. And then also down here, you're going to make sure that the looping option is on forever. Obviously, you could have it once, but then it just kind of plays and that's it. With the forever, it has that just going back and forth continuously. So that is what I prefer to pick. So I just clicked forever, and then you're just going to go ahead and click save, and then save it to wherever you want from there. And now you have a looping GIF of your image. Because of the attention 3D cameras have gotten from music videos and social media, you're going to be looking at a couple $100s for one of these now. Luckily, my local store, where I get most of my film from, was selling one of these, and I was able to pick it up for a decent price, but most likely you're probably going to have to turn to eBay to get one of these. I think my images turned out okay. Definitely not as much movement as I was kind of imagining when I was shooting these. But this was just my first roll putting through the camera. So obviously, the more rolls I'll shoot, the better things will get. And also kind of just because I was shooting buildings and not people. So when I start, shooting people again, hopefully I'll, get those photos that, when you see people advertising this camera, they'll look more like that. But then kind of another thing is, from the lenses, I was getting a little bit of vignetting around the image. But I was also shooting in bright daylights and in darker settings, you won't really notice the vignetting. But it did bother me a little bit. But that's just also kind of another thing to take into account if you want to get this camera. But other than that, it is really simple to use. You literally just press the button and you're all set. I didn't really play around with the aperture too much because, I was in harsh setting and I did have the flash if I needed it. But yeah, 3D cameras are fun and different. And, obviously you could recreate the effect with a digital camera if you don't want to spend the extra money. But if, you shoot film and you appreciate film, then the Nishika N8000 would be a great camera to add to your collection.